globe shoots up through the stony ground. There's no road.
Welcome to another episode, I guess you would call it.
Episode.
Hitting to I am Billerica. My name's Jim O'Donnell. Tony Lucacio to my left, and he's still here. Peter Greeley, he hasn't retired yet. We thought he'd be down south somewhere with the geese, but Peter's here with us. And before I introduce the two guests, I just want to update a little bit from our last episode. I guess we were...
Audio difficulty?
Well, yeah, we apologize for the audio difficulty. But the other thing is, our guest that was here, and we're sure glad that he's had the time to stop by, was the newest selectman, Mr. Similaris. And George, I guess he may have had his figures a little bit skewed in a part that he talked about, and we may get into this later on with our guest, just to update what exactly going on. But he talked about the debt of the town of Billerica, and I think it's a disservice to the community that we don't have the exact figures. And George mentioned, I think, a $100 million debt. And it wasn't too long right after that I received an email from, I believe, the chairman of the finance committee, if she's still that, is actually he was a little off on his figures. The debt, to my knowledge, and to hers, is 78. So there's a difference about $22 million there. So I would hope as people come on and take the time to sort of update not only us but the public out there, please bring the correct figures. We'd ask you to do that. You know, we try to get it out there as much as we can. On that note, from now on, if you're going to come, we appreciate anybody, but bring those numbers with you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'd like to introduce the town manager, John Curran, and the superintendent of schools, Tim Piwowar. I think they're going to update us. Speaking of debt, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of figures today about all different issues going on and what exactly changing and what's updated in town. So, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I want to, before we get into the issue that obviously is going to be the centerpiece of this discussion, Tim, if I could you tell us a little bit about this grant I heard for the Lott Middle School yesterday regarding electrical changes?
Yeah, sure. We just received a grant just within the last week or so for about $50,000. It's an energy efficiency grant that allows us to go and replace old lighting in the Lott School. We're going to prioritize those common area spaces, cafeteria, gymnasium, auditorium, places like that allows us to go and replace that lighting with more energy efficient lighting. So the money that's come in is obviously coming in as a grant, and then there's also going to be long-term operating savings in utilities because we'll have more energy efficient lighting. So we're very happy to have that grant, and I want to thank my team for, particularly Sam Rippin, my assistant super for finance and operations, for procuring that grant for us. So these are the kinds of things we have been trying to pursue over the last few years, where we're trying to make these kinds of improvements. We did lighting projects at the high school and the Marshall and in the rink in the recent past in the same kind of way. Because if we can invest some money, even whether it's through our operating budget or even better through a grant, that's going to produce us long-term operating savings, that's a win for everybody.
I was very pleased to hear it yesterday, and as I say, I heard it in an ad on the radio yesterday as I was driving around town, and I said, I was doing my research in my car.
We want to ask.
Satellite radio.
Satellite radio? Yeah, I like that.
And then to kick off the show with what is the hot topic, could you gentlemen both give us some sort of idea of the process to go and apply for and hopefully receive an MSBA loan or grant for a new building?
Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I can walk through the initial phases of this. Yeah. So the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, has a very prescriptive process. They had the old School Building Authority, which had existed up until about the mid-2000s. There were some issues, particularly the Newton North High School project got a lot of publicity at the time. And so
$200 million for a high school?
The SBA shuttered their doors for a couple of years and then reopened with some new procedural safeguards in place to make sure that their mission is to build the most educationally sound and fiscally responsible projects that they can. And so the very first step in that process is the communities need to submit what's called a statement of interest. It says we have an interest in doing something to address the educational and physical needs of this particular site. So we submitted an SOI for the high school back in April of this year. That SOI has to be approved by both the school committee and the Board of Selectmen. It was approved by both boards unanimously back in April. So that SOI was submitted to the state. It's a competitive process where the state then evaluates all the SOIs that they've received. And I believe they've received 201 SOIs in this, I guess, last fiscal year, because it's technically, it was FY14 when they were submitted. Some of those are for smaller projects like roofs or windows and boilers. Some of these are larger scale projects like what we're talking about for the high school. The next step then is if a project is proceeding forward, the state will enter you into what's called an invitation for eligibility phase. That invitation for eligibility, the town then has to secure money for a feasibility study, has to create a building committee. We've actually taken care of both of those steps already here in anticipation of hopeful funding and approval from the MSBA. Those were both addressed at this fall's town meeting. And I want to thank John and his team for cooperation in having those steps come forward. So, locally we secured $2 million for the feasibility study in the October 2013 town meeting. The building committee has been formed. They'll have their first meeting was actually postponed from earlier this week because of the snow. We'll be meeting just after the first of the year. And now we're waiting to hear from the MSBA. The MSBA's next board meeting is January 29th. We spoke with them as recently as last week, where they were essentially calling to confirm that we've met all of our obligations, which we were very happy to report that we have, should they choose to put us on the agenda for that January 29th meeting. So then you go through it, to shorten the talking about the length of the process, a feasibility study is designed to identify what's your preferred option. Is it repair? Is it renovation? Is it renovation addition? Is it new construction? Where does it go? What does it look like? Develop schematic design, develop cost estimates. So then the community as a whole can either vote up or down on the project, knowing exactly what it's going to look like, where it's going to be, how much it's going to cost, which here would have to go through a town meeting vote to put on the ballot for debt exclusion, and ultimately a debt exclusion vote for the community.
Takes you longer to describe it.
I know.
Again, the MSBA has to partner with you every step along the way because they want to make sure that they're compliant with their mission, which is, educationally sound, fiscally responsible, and so there are those safeguards along the way. The first steps in that feasibility process are to hire an owner's project manager, an OPM, to hire a designer to design the building, and that's done in conjunction with both your building committee and the MSBA. Having seats at that table.
And
So-
the reimbursement, should they put us on a list, could be anywhere between 30 and 80. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, the reimbursement rate for the Parker was what?
52%. I
Yeah.
think you could, as a rule of thumb, I always use 50%
Sure.
because
Yeah.
what you have to,
Conservatively.
yeah, and what you realize too is that not everything is reimbursable.
Correct.
So at the end of the day, it comes closer to a number about 50%. So in all the financial numbers we put together, we use that as a tool. It's conservative, and it's probably where it's going to come in at the end of the day. The three, like Tim went through, like you said, it is kind of a long process, but the three critical things, one we've already done, which is we've funded the $2 million. And then the next critical one is this meeting in January. It's funny because that could actually be more critical than a debt exclusion vote because you can't go to the party unless you get invited. So they have to invite you into the process, and once you get invited into that process, you now become eligible for that reimbursement. And you also then are able to invest $2 million into design, and it's called project scope and budget. So at the end of the day, when they do a debt exclusion, what you have before you is called project scope and budget, which is basically what it's going to cost and where it's going to be. And so that's what you present to the people. Now, the downside to the new process is that it's quite cumbersome. The upside to it is that it does prevent runaway schools. So it probably adds a little money to the whole process, but in the end, it prevents a runaway school like you saw in Newton. So, we're doing pretty well, and I think we did something a little different here in Billerica. We actually got the money ahead of the SOI vote, so I think that's going to help us when we go through MSBA. We nuanced that a little bit, and we figured out how to do that, and I think that will help us. And I'm positively optimistic that we will get invited into the
I
process.
noticed that Saugus this week is now off the list for their high school. They didn't meet, I guess, all the requirements that were needed, so I had read that they're taken off. And some of the other schools that are either at completion or near done, looks like Springfield, they got 80% for that. We'd like to get 80 here, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunately the
City
reimbursement.
schools do much
Yeah,
better.
the reimbursement rate is based upon the demographics of the community,
Sure.
so it's.
And I saw that
She'd
Wilbraham
love to hear Tony.
got a new school, but they got a pool in there. So I thought they were getting rid of some of those.
Yeah,
types
the
of
pools
things.
are non-reimbursable.
Yeah.
But they put it on the MSBA website, this big picture of this new pool in Wilbraham, and that they funded this for, the school was 107
Do you want a
million.
pool?
I don't want a pool.
No,
but
all
I'm
right,
just
that's
saying.
right.
I was just trying to think of the things that meet
Yeah.
the goal requirements of education and efficiency, and for them to put that on the website that there's a pool. I mean, everybody that visits the website thinks that, well, they're going to build pools now, in addition to the schools. But
I mean, that's a maintenance nightmare to take care of a pool. Those
I'm sure it
eat
is.
away at the building just by being there. But on the other hand, fields are not reimbursable, at least
Right.
the turf fields. But that's something you're more likely to see in a town like Billerica, is that we would end up footing 100% of the cost of that whole project, the field project. But when you start talking about spending the kind of money you're going to spend, you want a complete product. You don't want something that's split up on different sections of the town. And if you're going to make that kind of investment, let's do it right.
I understand that.
And anybody who's watched this Thanksgiving's football day game where all the lines were painted on Wednesday and got washed up by 2 inches of rain Wednesday night might have appreciated a different kind of field for
No, I would have
Thanksgiving
appreciated a
morning.
dome. It would have kept us warm.
He just
Listen to the guy who's going to pay for it.
Yeah, no, he's gonna. Yeah, he'll send you the money.
Guy's got his first nickel,
I mean, speaking of paying for it, is it?
Wow, that's a cheap shot.
Whoa, wow, probably accurate.
but not inaccurate.
Very inaccurate.
What I take reading the paper and going to some of the meetings and all some of the, obviously your community meetings, is that you two seem to be, obviously, John, your experience in 2 schools, I believe, in Woburn?
Yeah, 3 schools in Woburn.
3 schools in Woburn.
One in
you were there.
Maynard and
Okay, so
one here. And
So I mean, you bring
yeah.
that experience here, but I mean, you've already addressed, and sounds to me that, what I looked at there, I think in early December when you had the rate hearings right around there, you're talking about the costs
Yeah,
and how it affects and the potential cost to the taxpayers. Because you go out there and you hear stories, we're going to get $500 a year, you hear all kinds of crazy things that people say things. Unfortunately, as earlier you say, people say things they don't have necessary information. How does that working out?
so,
Just so people understand.
that's the whole thing. The rubber meets the road is,
Yeah.
what is this going to cost me? As a taxpayer, what is it going to cost me and what am I going to get? So the two, to the best of our knowledge at this point, the facility is in the range of, it could be anywhere from 140 to something less than that or something more than that, $1 million for that facility. Now that's an imposing number, but keep in mind, we're paying for half of that. So what we do is we go out and forecast the debt schedules for $75 million and figure out what would be the impact on the average taxpayer. Knowing what we have with the Parker School already, and we incorporate that in, we have one debt exclusion for the Parker, which is costing about $84 right now for the average taxpayer. And it was represented to cost up to $100. So we fulfilled what was represented to the town at that point. So then the high school, what is that going to cost? So on the average value of a home, the average value of a home being $309,000, $309,700. So that would be probably just over $200 a household for both schools, not for the high school, for both schools. So what I've been doing is running the numbers with our financial advisor over 28 years, because that's the way the debt is structured, and we're using very conservative interest rates of 4.5%, 4.25%, and knowing that we got 2.1 for the Parker. So we're using very high numbers to make sure that we're not going to come in short. And so using those numbers, we're in the range of 200 to 225 for the average household. So that's for both schools. And then if you take that number, if you take, so what we're doing is we're using debt stabilization to buffer that number. We're going to use about $8 million.
Which you just started, right, when you came on
We
board,
did.
I believe? Because I know
We
that
did.
wasn't
So
around.
we actually have 2 debt stabilization funds. One for general fund debt, which is the sewer projects,
Yeah.
which is actually a much bigger project than the high school. It's not as visible, unfortunately.
Or glamorous.
Or glamorous. But it's $260 million. So we've been setting aside debt stabilization for that purpose. Then we also started setting aside debt stabilization for the high school for debt exclusions. And we forecast that we're going to need about $8 million. Now the luxury of this, using it as debt stabilization, is we don't need it right away. we need it over 28 years. So that is eminently doable. In fact, we've already got, I think, a couple $1 million in that account. So what we'll do what we've done is use free cash over time. We'll put money into that account and then use that money to buffer the tax rate
The rate down, yeah.
in those years. So someone will say, well, what about using that to pay down the principal? And, well, we don't have $10 million today. We're going to have it over a period of time. And what we're doing is leveraging the financial strength of the town, which, by the way, is very strong. It's never been stronger. And using that to keep the town affordable. So at the end of the day, you know, people could say, how are you going to do it and what's you going to do? Bottom line is, what's it going to cost me and what am I going to get? And that's ultimately the decision that a voter will have to make when the debt exclusion is presented to the community. And the short answer to that is, Bobby Kennedy said, hang a lantern on your troubles. Don't hide the cost. Tell them what it is. The cost is about $225 for both schools, not one, both. Do you think that's an affordable or reasonable amount of money to pay for 140 plus another 30, $170 million worth of educational assets in the community?
I'm sure we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So that's the question, and it's a fair question, and it's one for the people to make. So we're doing our job is to present that information to the community and let them decide on their own, and hopefully, you know, a good decision will be made for the town.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, part of the key to this plan is that debt stabilization economy. There was an argument at this fall's town meeting where eventually the vote to put money into that account came back on reconsideration, and you know, it wasn't a willingness as part of that discussion not to spend money in the schools. It's about how do we spend it. And I know John had gotten up and talked about needing to have the essentially forethought to have a plan, stick with it. And you know, those numbers will be out publicly about exactly what does that debt schedule look like, how is debt stabilization used in a responsible way. And so it's a plan that, you know, for the next few years we're going to look to put money into that account so that we can draw it down in a responsible way to help mitigate the impact of taxpayers in this community.
For Peter, just one quick question to go with this. I just want to ask.
You never have a quick
No. When
The answer's a long question.
okay,
It takes a long time.
when do you think literally this would be added to, you know, in a conservative way, when it would hit your the people's side?
2019.
2019.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, we're not
be
talking
gone
next
by then.
year.
No.
Right.
Everything else, yeah. You know, so I mean, people should understand that there's a whole process before them before this ever hits them. You know,
Right.
it's not going to open up their.
Municipal borrowings, we borrow short-term for a number of years while you're building the project, like a construction loan on your home. So you roll it over and you pay virtually nothing for it in today's dollars. And then you have to pay for it when you go long-term.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can I go back to the $2 million feasibility study that was funded in the fall town meeting? Am I right in assuming that until we get, as you quoted, invited to the dance, we will not have spent a nickel of that?
That's correct.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're not going to be, should on January 29th we get the worst possible news, we're not out that $2 million?
No, essentially that money would stay in the balance of the warrant article. We'd apply for an SOI again in this coming year. Should we be approved a year from now, then, you know, that money would be accessible at that point in time. But we wouldn't spend any of that money until we're approved by the MSBA.
Okay, that's good to know. Also, are you also saying that an MSBA cycle is 1 year?
Yeah, their SOI, it fluctuates a little bit from year to year as exactly when their deadlines for the SOIs are. They have already released the SOI information for this fiscal year. I believe they're due in the end of March, which means they'll probably be making decisions next fall into winter. So it's about a year process here because it runs on the fiscal year. The reason why is MSBA's funding actually comes from whenever you buy anything that has sales tax in the state, that's 6.25%, 1 penny of that sales tax goes to the MSBA to fund school projects. Their annual budget's around $500 million or so. So they've got to figure out how they allocate that money to the various school projects that they have going.
So Tony, by going to New Hampshire all the time, doesn't spend a
No,
nickel?
no, he just went where I was going to go on this, and that was about asking about the amount of money, where it comes from. It's about 16%
Yeah.
of the sales tax. And I just ask you to consider this. First, I guess from 10,000 feet, should the state be in the business of building schools? When I present it to you this way, that according to the MSBA website, 947 projects for $16.4 billion. It's about 17 million, a little more than $17 million per project, okay? Which we would agree that's probably what, they've probably done some smaller projects and they've done some larger projects, right? So And that's across 250 school districts, which is a couple. And some of the cities probably have a few more schools, obviously, and we've gotten one so far. But out of the sales tax, that's 16%. The state collects $5.2 billion in sales tax, right? And that's about 6.5 million people here in Massachusetts, right? For every man, woman, and child, $800 a person. Which would be about, that means our taxpayers are contributing, right? Billerica taxpayers are contributing about $5 million towards the MSBA every year, right? 1% of what they pay in sales tax.
Well, let him finish. His math is somehow might be skewed, but go ahead.
No,
Same question.
$800 a person,
Okay.
right? There's 40,000 residents in Billerica.
Do you think 6 and 7 year olders are spending $800?
No, I said for every man, woman, but that applies statewide, so it doesn't matter, right? So where's my math wrong on that? If it's 16% or $5 million that goes to the MSBA, would you not have to ask ask the MSBA to help build schools if the taxpayers of Billerica gave you $5 million a year to dedicate it just towards building schools? I guess that would be my question. If tomorrow the taxpayers of Billerica said, we're going to dedicate $500 million towards ours, $5 million, I'm sorry, thank you.
Okay.
$5 million.
500 million to take to
$5
that.
million,
I got to form a guess that. So his
$5 million to Billerica schools every year for the purposes of building new schools. Would you think that would be a better deal than going to the state for 50% reimbursement?
Well, it depends. The $5 million, is that on top of what they pay now, or are you asking them to cut
absolutely,
that out?
because if they didn't have to pay the 1%,
Yeah.
right, the 1 cent, I guess, the 16%. So if your sales tax was still back to 5.25 instead of 6.25, or whatever the heck it is now. But
Well, I guess the short answer is no, because the debt service on the high school alone is going to be over $5 million. So that means you can't do anything more than the high school with that number.
every year, though, you'd be getting the same
Yeah.
$5 million.
You're getting the same $5 million, so I assume you're going to apply that $5 million to debt service.
I'm saying you could take it and build schools with $5 million a year.
I know, but what I'm telling you is you can only build the high school. We can't even pay the debt service on the high school with $5 million a
So
year.
you think this community benefits by spending $5 million,
I do.
giving $5 million to the MSBA every year?
Absolutely,
Okay,
yeah.
just want to understand
Yeah.
where you're coming from with it.
So your whole plan of action here is, I just think it would cost me $2,400 a year.
That's what you pay in sales tax now.
No. Yeah, well, towards, you're saying $800 per person. And-
That's what
yeah.
that's what you're paying now in sales tax.
All right, I mean, not
No,
to go
sales
too
tax,
deep
not
into
to
this.
the 1%. That's not your 1 penny's worth. That's your complete sales tax.
So you're trying to eliminate all sales tax and just,
No, I'm not. I'm just saying. My question was: is the 16% used wisely by having to do it with the MSBA
Tony's-
as opposed to doing
I
it
know.
Tony's
within the
saying
community?
he doesn't want to be paying, he doesn't mind paying the liquor schools.
Correct.
He doesn't want
Yeah.
to pay for Tewksbury's and Newton
Correct.
North.
If
That's
I
what
can-
he's,
if I
that's
can
what he's
jump in
saying.
here, because
Okay, jump.
actually, I've been taking some graduate classes.
If I
on
can-
this
Yeah, I heard you missed
issue.
the meeting for that.
And
If I can paraphrase you.
sales tax is one of the things that we were talking about, and so this, you're gonna love this. And
Coming from him, I'm sure that's probably not the truth.
so it's redistribution, that's what it is. So a community like Weston.
You're in favor of
gonna-
that. Wait a minute, you're in favor of that.
Well, in Billerica's case, yes, because a community like Weston is gonna get 20% on the dollar for their high school. A community like Billerica is gonna get over 50 cents on the dollar. So we benefit in that scenario because stuff from people that are buying, spending.
Yeah, but
money
we
on
lose
sales
in
tax.
Springfield's case because they get 80%.
Right, but in the grand scheme of things, as I had just pointed out about just take the high school alone, we're getting more out of it than we're losing because we're in the middle of the pack.
we get the average.
But the person that lives in Weston spends a lot more money on sales tax than the person that lives in Billerica, and they don't see any of that money at all. It goes to Springfield, it goes to Billerica, it goes to other communities. So it's the redistribution argument that you're sort of touching on.
I hope you're all paying attention to that at home about redistribution.
Yeah. So, but it's an interesting thing. But and some people lose from it, and some people. I mean, some municipalities will lose and some will win.
Sure.
So I guess I think in Billerica's case, in the current arrangement, they're benefiting from the way that's structured because more money is coming our way. As long as we aggressively pursue it. If we don't, then shame on us. Then we lose. But if we aggressively pursue those state dollars, then I think we actually win.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
in terms of, bringing it out of the hypothetical realm into,
Yeah.
into, sort of the process we're looking at here, I mean, the importance of the MSBA's partnership is the reliability of that funding. And, once that money is in the pool and once the project starts, and the fact that in the old model, they used to get your reimbursement at the end. Now it's
as you go
MSBA pays as you go. And that's the same process we went through the Parker. So in terms of having that level of stability and if I can make up a word, guaranteedness.
Well, it
of
reduces,
that reimbursement coming in.
it reduces the interest too. So
Yeah,
I understand
exactly,
that
yeah.
because they're paying within 15 or 20 days of you submitting invoices for
Absolutely.
it. I get that.
Yeah, once you get in, that's the key, getting in.
Sure.
So you're in, but let's talk, well, Tony's hypothetical things. Let's talk about what it means to the town. Obviously, Tim, can bring up the impact it would have with the students and the education part of it, but it's also going to mean an impact when it comes to residential taxes, values of their homes. I think we're looking all around the community. I mean, the Merrimack Valley now, Wilmington just approved one, Tewksbury just opened one. You look at Burlington. I mean, so you're competing, and you've brought this up a number of times in some of the meetings I've watched, competing. So I mean, and I'll use Woburn as an example. I'm sure when you opened up a new high school and stuff, did you see? I mean, it opened up to growth of people deciding, this is a destination. You use your word, Tim, a destination place for education. I throw it out to both of you. I mean, one from experience and one from, a person that's sitting there looking at the education component.
Well, so let me talk about the educational piece first. I mean, you're absolutely right. Our goal as a district, and I've said this a billion times at this point, is that we want to be the destination for education in the Merrimack Valley. And, it's great to have, we need to work on both fronts. We need to work on both the physical complex of our schools as well as what goes on inside of them. I mean, if we could have the shiniest new school, but if there's not solid education going inside, then, that's not worth it. But that being said, I mean, the Parker is a great example. We opened up the Parker last year, and with the opening of that school, the MSBA dictates there's a certain amount that has to be spent on technology. So for that school, it was $1,200 per student, 500 students, that's $600,000 on technology invested in the Parker, which we used for iPads and smart board or interactive boards in every classroom and other devices. That school last year was there's an accountability system for schools for level 1 through 5. The Parker was our only level 1 school in the district last year, showing that, now some of that is building and the access to technology, some of that is the fantastic teaching that's going on in that building, but there are some things that go hand in hand, and just culturally being in a place that, where, the studies that show about, natural light going into classrooms and having an impact on how well students learn. All of those pieces together led to some great outcomes educationally last year. Not to mention, obviously, the whole civic pride piece that comes from that. And when you talk about the impact financially on the town, when you can speak to this better than I can, but about, what homes are going for in that Parker School District right now. I believe
there's been a bump in sales, both in value and in sales in that neighborhood. They go off the list right away. People want to locate next to the new school. So you can logically deduce that the same thing's going to happen with the high school. And I was thinking...
It's funny, you say that, just to interrupt you, and I apologize, but there was, literally on Allen Road, there's a small subdivision going up. And part on the bottom of the informational board that was out there, one of them was, these students will be going to the new Parker School. That's how he was using that for publication and trying to, sell his, which is interesting how, that's literally what you're saying is happening out there now.
And obviously, I mean, there's the piece where, the one of the strongest things about, I mean, I have recently moved my own family, and when we were, we're obviously looking at the schools. I've got 2 young children of my own, and the quality of the education system in the community has such an impact on home prices, and the quality of the high school in particular, because everybody in that town goes to the high school, or at least has the opportunity to go to that high school. They may choose other options. And when we talk about what the average overall impact of that debt exclusion is over 28 years, it was about $5,200, something like that?
Yeah.
The value of what your home will likely increase with having those kinds of brand new facilities exceeds the outlay you would be making in terms of the debt exclusion.
And to follow on that, if you're a senior citizen, obviously a lot of them are living on fixed income, so they're very worried about what the impact would be to them. But so if you just take the high school alone and ballpark it at $150 a household over 10 years, that's $1,500. So the increase in value of their home over 10 years with the new high school is going to exceed $1,500, I could say. So someone who's a senior in their 70s, they're either going to sell their house or they're going to sell it to one of their kids. So there's some they're going to realize the increased value of that home probably most of all, because those are the people that will sell their house in the next 10, 20 years. Whereas 50 years from now, the people, who were younger, their kids will realize the benefit of the school. But, obviously the amortized value of the school will be less 50 years from now than it is 10 years from now. So I think everybody benefits in one way or another. So there's enough to go around for people to realize that the security in this investment.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll add to that too, I mean, when the biggest, or one of the biggest sources, or the biggest source of state funding is the Chapter 70 money that comes in. That's education related, and that's based upon the number of students you have in your district. Right now, our attrition rate, our number of students we lose, the percentage of students we lose from grade 8 to grade 9, is hovering between 30 and 35% annually. Those are students going to Shawsheen, students going to private schools, students going to charter schools, and the more attractive we can make that high school, the more students we can keep in the district, the more money that we can get in that impacts the entire town, not just the school budget, but the overall town budget as well, through Chapter 70 funding.
There's a frustration level out there. It's funny you bring that up with Shawsheen Tech. It's a frustration level that people have that, literally, I won't get into my philosophy here with Charlie Lyons, but
Sure you won't.
Somehow I think
when you
that.
handpick individuals or students, but a lot of kids can't. There's a waiting list because of different scenarios. And I know you've talked about bringing some of those features back to the high school if you have the location and the ability.
Yeah. So let me just preface my remarks here by saying that any student that wants to go to an educational facility, vocational, private, charter, what have you, that is going there for a particular reason, I have no issue with that. I mean, students and families should have the right to go where they want to go without question. What I have an issue with are students that are running from us and running from what we have. And there's, when I talk with families that are going to there's the Minuteman issue, that we know that there's some students that are going to Minuteman because there's some students that go to Minuteman because of the programs they have, but there are others that go because they can't get into Shawsheen, and over my dead body will I go to that high school. I mean, I've heard that from parents.
Yep.
And that's an issue. That's an issue that we need to rectify and we need to solve. So, when right now our 8th grade kids, the acceptance rate in Shawsheen is maybe about 70% in the last year or two. And so if we can bring more students in that can be successful at either location and make them want to come to our high school, and by offering more hands-on type programs, and I'm not talking about replicating what Shawsheen has, because they can do that better than we can. I mean, their funding formula is set up in a way that, the full-fledged Chapter 74 programs, it doesn't make sense for us to duplicate them. But if we can find ways to complement and we can find ways to give kids opportunities, we've got a very fledgling robotics program at the high school right now. And we actually, you mentioned grants earlier, Peter. We just got a $116,000 grant for a whole bunch of science stuff to come in, particularly to, it's Project Lead the Way is a program that's very engineering based that we're going to play in with that robotics piece. Those kinds of opportunities where kids can be hands-on and authentically engaged in learning, that's some of the reason why kids are going to Shawsheen, because they don't see that at our high school right now. And with the change in leadership we've had at the high school, with the approach we're trying to take to things, these are all really positive steps to provide those opportunities. Now, the robotics team I talked about, they're using the old auto shop right now. They're trying to clean out the old auto shop and do what we can to have that be a space that we can use. It's not an ideal space. If you actually had a designed place in a new building to allow that to happen, or to allow the amazing things that our biology teachers are doing. I mean, this is such a hotbed for biotech in this part of the state. And we've had some great partnerships with EMD Serono and EMD Millipore and other places over the years, where they've been able to donate some of their equipment that we can use in our classrooms. But you walk into our labs and they look like the labs that when they were built in the 70s. And so having those opportunities for kids to use the kind of equipment and have the kinds of spaces they're going to need to use in college and beyond college in their careers, that's essential for our kids to be competitive when they go forward.
Peter.
Pete, your head's on.
Well, yeah,
You can tell by the look on his face.
I
can't you?
can tell you.
I got the what look?
That look.
I've got a kind of a problem with. I agree with you saying that the high school made, as opposed to Shawshing Tech and private schools, people, you said, run away from it. My experience with the Billerica school system has been wonderful. I had both children graduate. I had both children go to private colleges. That's a gripe I have, but that's another issue. They're both working in their fields of study that they studied in college. One of them went to an Ivy League school. What more is there?
Complaining about
Well, I think the issue, it's a,
Huh?
You're still complaining you're paying for that.
I'm still paying for it, but what the hell?
the issue is a perceptive issue. And, kids are making that choice before they've been in the, it's not like once they come in as freshmen, they're leaving. They're generally making that decision as they're leaving 8th grade and going into 9th. And they've maybe seen a little bit of the building, but they haven't seen enough of what goes on inside. So, we've tried doing some new things this year. We had an open house back in the fall where we invited parents to actually go through and be taught mini lessons by teachers at the high school to see what kind of stuff that we're doing. I remember one of the parents said to me that night, when they were up in the chemistry lab and we were setting gummy bears on fires to show the caloric energy inside the gummy bears and how it turns.
Now that's a waste.
So,
sugar.
but no, to show that essentially all the calories and the sugar inside the gummy bears, and that turns into heat energy to demonstrate that to kind of things that you do with sophomores. And I remember one parent saying to me, "God, I wish I could go back to high school tomorrow instead of going to work, because this is good and this is exciting." It's pieces like that where some of the kids that leave, I don't think have given the high school a fair shot, because there are incredible teachers in that building. There are incredible programs in that building. We've been expanding the AP offerings over the last few years. So we're running, I think it's 15 different advanced placement classes right now where kids can earn college credit before they leave. But there are perceptive issues that we need to overcome, which is why we need to do the kind of marketing that we never had to do 10 years ago. Education is a competitive endeavor now, where we need to showcase what we have to families, to parents, to students, to allow them to look deeper and be able to figure out why they want to come and be a part of Billerica Memorial High School.
I just think there should be some way to advertise it. The year my son graduated, there were 8 students in Billerica High that got 800s on their math SATs the year he graduated. 8 students. That compares to any place.
In the interest of full disclosure, my daughter, obviously, she did not go to Billerica. Public
That's
School.
shocking.
I'm just, look, but like he said, it was for a host of reasons, and not all of it was. Some of it was running, right?
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, but it wasn't running from the quality of the teachers. It was some of the extra challenges that go on in high school, particularly when you have a girl that you say, you know what, if I can take her away from that, then I'm going to take her away from that, right? But to advertise, I could tell you one great advertising tool that Billerica High has. I've had the opportunity to meet with those kids in the DECA program a lot recently, and I got to tell you, those kids are way above where most kids their age are in the way they can present themselves, and they can speak about what they've been doing in the classroom. Magliozzi is that teacher?
John Magliozzi
yeah,
is the
John.
teacher.
Great job. And I tell you, the more you get those kids out to do your PR work, the much better off the school system.
And we've been having a lot of conversations. For those that don't know DECA, DECA is an international marketing program where students are essentially compete in different categories. And we have been sending probably about average of 25 to 30 students annually to the national competition. Actually, technically it's the international competition all over the country, whether it's Anaheim or Nashville or down in Orlando. And we've been taking home national first place trophies, I think 3 over the last 4 or 5 years that we've brought back. I mean, one of my favorite projects is that we had a team of students who was, they were a pair of students as seniors. They were in the sports entertainment marketing program. And their project was to develop a social media marketing plan for the Boston Bruins. And they met with executives at the Bruins. They developed their plan to the point where the Bruins, it was during their Stanley Cup run a couple of years ago. And it pains me as a Buffalo guy and a Sabres fan to say that. But they took one of their ideas and implemented it during their playoff run that season. And the idea was to take QR codes, the little squares that you can scan with your phone, put QR codes on the bottom of their game programs that would direct fans to the Bruins Club website to get them discounted things on merchandise, to get their email addresses in, to allow for more continued marketing. I mean, that's the level of quality that our business program is putting out in our students. And those students actually won national and collegiate DECA the following year as freshmen as well. Our 2 biggest calling cards at the high school right now honestly, our DECA marketing program and our fine arts program. You see our musicals, you see our orchestra, you see our choral groups. I mean, they put out phenomenal stuff. At the same time, we need to market the academic piece because we have amazing students in the academic realm. Let me rephrase it, because I mean, all those other pieces are academic as well too, but when you think about sort of traditional academic realm, whether it's in the engineering classes that we're having now, or in biotech, or great writers, those are the pieces that we're missing, sharing those stories as well as we share some of these other ones.
Get the word out on what those kids are doing in DECA. Yeah. Get those kids to speak in front of whether it's Billerica Alliance and those business leaders or the Greater Lowell Chamber of Commerce. Get those kids in front of those people. That is their best marketing tool. I mean, so that those other people in the community can be aware of exactly what the projects are that those kids are working on. Because we hear about the DECA kids or whatever it happens to be, but we don't know what they're doing. Yeah. So show us what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, a couple of months ago, and we actually just had a meeting about this a week or two ago with Stephanie Curran and Caroline Catlender. We had our first, we called it the Breakfast of Champions, and we talked about not just the high school, but all of our schools in the district, where we brought together representatives from business.
We had somebody there from our office.
And it was talking about the part, whether it's with DECA or whether it's the partnership that we had with Orbotech, where they're working with our engineering classes at the high school, or whether it's some of the grant funding that's been achieved at the middle school level to help increase science labs, or whether it's the program where people from the businesses down off of Middlesex Turnpike come into the Vining and read to kids during power lunches. Those kinds of partnerships is another. We have such a great resource in the business community in this area that we need to grow in. And it's having kids be the face of that, to your point. Yeah. I mean, it's whether it's the DECA kids, whether it's whoever it is.
Whatever it is, exactly.
Get our kids out front and center. I agree.
Just to illustrate a point, you're talking about the fine arts program. I just can't resist but bringing this up. The MSBA came and they did a tour through the building. And it was almost like it was choreographed, although Tim claims it wasn't.
It was not.
But we were walking through the building, and there was an orchestra out there playing in the hall because they had nowhere else to rehearse. And we're walking through, and the MSBA is walking through, and I said, "Wow, this is unbelievable." You think about how well that program is, and how well known it is, and successful. Think about what they could do if they had the right facilities, and they're doing pretty well now. But if they had the facilities, I mean, that would really go a long way.
Next time it will be choreographed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was funny because we're walking through and there they were in the hall, and I said, "This is perfect," But it's a comprehensive thing, and it isn't just about the building. People say, "Well, the building's not going to solve everything." That's true.
Agreed.
But I think you can see just by listening to Tim today that they're not just looking at the building; they're looking at everything. And one of the things we just talked about recently was full-day kindergarten, and unfortunately, that might be a situation in Billerica that might actually cost us money. In a lot of cases, it doesn't because of the Chapter 70 formulas. Still doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it because it's
worthwhile to do.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So we're going to be looking at that over the next few years, and on the town side, we're receptive to funding that and figuring out a way to do that. But it isn't just about the building, and people need to know that it's being looked at it from all perspectives.
But we do need a building. I don't.
Right.
I don't misinterpret the things I said. Absolutely, I've said that.
You just want a one-room schoolhouse.
No, they need a better facility. I agree with that. I just want it to be taken care of for longer than 40 years, I guess.
Yeah. And that that's a part that we've heard loud and clear. I mean, that was one of the biggest sticking points with the park. It wasn't the only, but the perception: why should we give you a new building when you couldn't take care of the old ones? And I think that we've certainly, at least since I've been involved, we've been trying to make a more conservative effort. We've got money built into our budget every year for extraordinary maintenance. We've been trying to use free cash in a responsible way to address problems proactively. The Hodger column replacement that we're doing right now is a key example of that, where if we had waited a few more years, that's a building that could be to potentially have major structural issues and have to close. But we're addressing it now because it needs to be addressed, and that's the responsible thing to do.
And again, it's a 40-year-old building.
Yeah.
John, just to switch gears a little bit, and you bring up financing. Is it on your side of it? Obviously, Tim is the educational, but it's he's dependent on financing coming in, whether it's state, local, federal. How does the town? I know you started off. How's the town finance? You said we're in good financial health, but what do you see? You're getting ready to start putting your budgets together, both of you. You're starting to look at growth coming into the community. I mean, how things like that? That will offset, hopefully someday, if we get continued growth, could give you extra funding to do other things in the community. How do you, what's your vision?
So to add to that, let me just, maybe you can add into this so we can kill them both at once, but how do you set your priorities for what, based on what you know is coming down the road? Where do you get your focus from, and what is the priorities, I guess, of the community? Is it, is it a school? Is it our town center? Is it our storage treatment? Or what is it going to be?
Well, I guess it's funny because you started the show off talking about the debt of the town.
That's
It's roughly $80 million.
It is 78, am I correct? Not 100?
Yeah,
Okay.
and but I always try to bring things into a homeowner's perspective. So you look at things, when you go out and you refinance your home, or you want to take out an equity loan, they look at how much value you have in the home as a measure of whether you can take money out or not. And some, it'll be 70. You have to have at least 75% of the value of the home, or you can't exceed that in order to take out an equity loan. So the town of Billerica, the value of the town of Billerica is $5.4 billion. So we have $80 million in debt. That's a lot different than a homeowner. So we're not in any way stretching ourselves in terms of the amount of debt that we carry. If anything, we carry a minimal amount of debt for a community this size. Also, just like you do with your home, if you don't take out an equity loan and put a roof on your home, all the systems are going to fall apart. Same thing. We have to invest in the infrastructure in order for the town to maintain its viability and for people to want to come here and live here. So we also carry our debt in a fashion where we don't exceed 10% of our budget is not debt. Unlike the federal budget, which is a lot different. You and I are paying a lot more money in debt out of our taxes than we are for anything else. But we pay actually 7% of our budget is debt-based. So we're not. The generally accepted accounting principles is you should be 10% or lower. We're at 7%. We're trying to maintain that, and we're using those debt stabilization funds to do that. And that's where our financial strength comes into place, because the town is so financially solid that we're able to put money aside to plan for these rainy days. Now, Tony, you were talking about what are the priorities and how do we determine them. Big piece of that is planning. And I think in the past you hadn't seen comprehensive planning in town. You've seen,
Agreed.
Let's do this, let's do that. Some things were brought forward by petitioners, and there really needs to be a comprehensive plan, and there is one now that shows from the town side what we're looking at. That includes water, sewer, town center things. Also, on the school side, you have the schools and the long-range plan of what you're going to address. Like, what are we going to do new? What are we going to do as renovation? There is a plan in place for that. There's a financial schedule in place for that. There's also a financial schedule in place for our projects on the town side. Most of that is being chewed up by sewer work right now. So we forecast that out, and I know that in a certain point in time, we're going to bump over what I consider to be 7% of the debt that we should carry. That's when we use the debt stabilization to do that. So we prioritize all of our projects based on what we have, how we can financially meet those needs. Doesn't mean we can't do them. Just means we have to do them in such a way that we don't break the back of the taxpayer. And that's why we're doing these debt stabilization funds. So what we have done in the pipeline is sewer work scheduled out for the next 20 years, $260 million worth of sewer work. School work, I think that facility study is somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million.
That's $209 million, yeah.
And that's out over 20 years as well. When you take it out over 20 years, it's not as daunting as it is today.
Correct.
But you have to plan for those things, and that's the key. Instead of reacting, we're being proactive, and we're planning for those things. Obviously, I'd like to see some other infrastructure done,
Sure.
and we are doing that. We're using different vehicles for that. So sidewalks in town are being done through a different process that we're using some free cash, and we're using general fund appropriations to do $500,000 a year. So in each one of these different areas, we have a plan to how to address them. Just because we're doing sewer doesn't mean we can't do anything else.
Correct.
Just because we're doing a new high school doesn't mean we can't do anything else. And because we're doing these things doesn't mean that your taxes have to go through the roof. We can leverage the financial strength of the town to make sure that it remains affordable. And a big piece of that is economic development. There's been a shift from residential to commercial. I always look at the value of the town as a big pie, and about 70% of that pie is residential and the rest of it is commercial. I want to make the value of that pie more commercial than residential. And we've done that in the last year. We shifted 1 point. But that's the difference between $100 and $200 tax increase to a $30 increase,
Correct.
which is what we saw this year, if you take out the debt exclusion. So those are the things we're doing, is that if you keep pumping into economic investment, then you're going to make sure that you keep Billerica affordable. And so it's looking at the big picture, looking way down the road. I think Tim has a great team down the hall. They do the same thing, and he's not looking at one thing, he's looking at everything.
Okay, to follow up to Tim then,
Yeah.
for your priorities, obviously we've done the Ditson, we've done a
Yeah.
Parker, and on the drawing board is to do something with the high school.
Yeah.
Not only, well, for building, I guess, what's next? What will we be looking at down the road? And then finally, what are some of the other priorities?
Sure. So let me just echo what John said first, which was he's talking about the team that I have. I mean, certainly working with John and his team. I think the fact that we have a really strong relationship between the school department and the municipal side of government is what's allowing these priorities to work in conjunction with each other, as opposed to, if you
Fighting for the dollar.
Yeah, if you pin schools against sewers, nobody wins in that scenario. So it's
Right.
it's the opportunity that we have to work together. When you talk about the physical plan issue, when we did the master planning study was approved back in October 2011, we originally thought that the next sort of school on that list would be the Vining. It's the oldest school that we have in the inventory after the high school. It's a 1957 building. But surprisingly, we found that the Lock actually has more issues than the Vining has. And part of that is just the design of that building, the disability issues in that building. If you want to try to bring things up to code, it kicks in all of those ADA requirements. And so, when we look at our options related to that, and we don't know long-term what the future of the Vining is. We know that short-term it's certainly going to remain open until we figure out what happens with the high school project. And there's some potential implications there that we've talked about. But the Lock would really be the next thing on the hit list. But again, we've got to make sure that we look at that in a responsible way, looking at long-term debt schedules. But the MSBA will only let you do one project at a time.
Sure.
So, if the high school is opening in, if we're able to get through and it's opening in 2018, 2019, we've got to be prepared 5-6 years from now to move at that and then talk about what are the long-term
and just to
implications.
interject, I mean, just so you know, because this is what you're asking, is we've plugged those scenarios in to see what they
I'm
would
sure you
do.
have.
Yeah.
And it keeps us on track with where we are. Nothing goes above where we are today. And so we know we're not just looking at the high school. We're looking down the road to see, all right, what will this do to our debt? And it's actually good news. We can maintain the debt service that we have, the debt level that we have, and still go out and do these projects because of the financial strength of the town. But we don't want to sticker shock everybody either and start talking about 10 different schools all at once. But it's our job to look down the road and say what will happen. So we do that. It's a chess game.
But by 2020, we could be having the same conversation again in this community.
We theoretically
We could.
could be, and it's people are going to say, how can you keep doing this all, one
Every
after
7
the
or
other?
8 years, right.
But I mean, when you think about the schools that we have in our inventory, they were all built right around the same time, and and I will say the quality of the construction of some of those buildings as they were going up so quickly, not just here but all over the state. That's why I think we have some of the issues we have. I mean, you find buildings that were built in the 20s and 30s that are in much better shape than buildings that were built in the 60s and 70s. That's just part of the nature of how construction was going at that time. But that being said, we've looked at, if we could phase things out and plan things out better so that they're not all coming due simultaneously,
Right.
that makes a lot more sense for 60 years down the road. You asked about other priorities. I mean, certainly full-day kindergarten is one that is an absolute priority of mine. It's a priority of the school committee. It's when we did a survey a couple of months ago to the parents in this community, it was overwhelmingly positive, and not just the parents, but parents and community members as a whole, to support it, not just because of the educational needs, but obviously, so many families are two working parent families, and the fact that our extended day tuition-based kindergarten program has gone up and up. Where we've got about 180 kids or so this year that are paying, into tuition-based K. That's great, but it's also an inequity issue. It's also, we don't get the funding for those kids. When we have full-day kindergarten, Chapter 70 is based upon entire kids as opposed to right now where they're only counted as half kids for the formula. And just the demands of educationally what we need from kindergarten, as well as trying to maintain the social and play atmosphere where kids learn how to do school, is so critical. And that's going to pay dividends down the road in terms of kids being educationally on par with their peers and not having, hopefully not having as many learning needs as they go down the line. So that's almost like preventative maintenance for our kids' education, is being able to get kids into kindergarten in a meaningful way early on at 5 years old.
Can I just go to one thing you've said? You both gentlemen have gone to a couple of times, and we're running out of time, but Tim, you've used the phrase MSBA dictates a couple of times. What impact will the MSBA actually have on what our finished product will look like?
So they will, they have a seat at the table. Their mission is to, I've said it about 6 times, I'll say it again, educationally sound, financially responsible. So if they see us going too far affray in either of those directions, they'll kind of, bring us back into the loop on that. That being said, but they're also only interested in investing in schools that the community is going to support. So, they want to make sure that we're out there doing the transparent, very transparent in the process, sharing with the public what our thoughts are, getting public feedback in that process, so that we can make sure that we're meeting that need. They sit at the table, they help dictate who the OPM is, they help dictate who the architect is, they obviously dictate what are the reimbursable costs, what aren't the reimbursable costs. And the OPM is such a key part of that because there are our technical representatives, our eyes and ears on the project to make sure that we don't have those cost overruns, that we don't have those quality deficiency issues, as opposed to the old model where there was a clerk of the works process where may have been good in some cases, may not have been good in other cases. But it's to make sure there's a high level of technical and financial oversight in the process. And certainly that worked very well in the Parker. The Parker School came in on time, under budget, with the ultimate financial impact being less than what was at the max.
We are here, you brought up.
I'm sorry, I talked.
No, that's what I interrupt.
It's not just him.
You bring up something quickly, and we have less than 3 minutes. Yeah. First of all, statement is I think Billerica, remember Valley had one of the lowest increases in taxes people should realize for this year, for real estate taxes. So I applaud both sides, the aisle here, both schools. But my question is, you bring a good point, perception. I hear rumors out there that Billerica's never done an override. Billerica, we just as the other night, I think you came in an MOS regarding the house correction, but you had people out there, it seems Billerica has this negative getting from some people out there. Is that a hurdle that you're trying to overcome? The Senate project itself, some of the other things that came before, you're outside and you're reading these things, and you just hit on that. Is that in one sense, a priority or two to change that image?
I think the answer to that, too, is transparency and planning. And you have to communicate. A lot of times, everyone knows I was a big advocate of the Senate project, and I wanted to see that happen. It'd be nice to blame a lot of other people for that, but what you have to do is look inward and say, what could we have done differently to make that happen? And I think the process was very transparent up until the point that there was an election call, but it wasn't very transparent after that because nothing happened. But, so that's the thing. Transparency is the key, is to try to communicate information to the people so they can make good decisions. And that they know that you're planning. You're planning for the future. And the last piece of it is, they want to know that their town forefathers all on the same page. And I think that those 3 things will help to alleviate that perception.
I totally agree. I'm just saying, he hit that part, and I've heard that out there, the perception of this
Thank
town.
you both for coming.
Yes.
Very happy to
Really,
participate.
I hope,
It was good practice for you, Tim.
Yeah.
Getting by Tony.
No, I thought it was great.
You kind of won him over part of it, but I think
we get to the same point. It's just sometimes we disagree on how to get there.
Go figure.
As long as you can take less money on it. Again, I just want to thank our guests, the town manager, John Curran, and Superintendent of Schools, Tim Piwowar. If this is aired before the holidays, we'd like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's.
Can we say Merry Christmas?
You can
now,
yeah.
yeah, we just
Supreme
did it,
Court
it's all
will
right. Please, if you have any ideas, please let us know if you want to bring people on or what we should be looking at.
We won't listen to you, but
Yeah, well, Tony won't. Again, enjoy it. Hopefully the weather stays warm as it has the last couple days.
Say goodnight,
Few costs,
Lucy.
but anyways, thanks a lot. Good night. Good health.